Princess Lyra stood at the high balcony as dawn's pale light crept across the marble halls. She wore a simple silk dress in soft green, the color of new leaves. In the quiet air, she listened to distant voices, soldiers drilling, hooves on stone, trumpets calling the day to begin. She felt small in the vast palace, as if the walls themselves pressed her down. Below her, the royal courtyard awoke. Her older sisters marched in perfect lines, their armor gleaming. They practiced sword swings and shield blocks, each movement precise and strong. Lyra watched them, wishing she could move like that. Each crack of steel on steel echoed in her chest like a challenge. At breakfast, nobles whispered in low voices. "She is too gentle," they said. "She cannot lead troops." Even her cousins shook their heads when she entered the hall. They spoke of her kindness, but never of courage. Lyra bowed her head, cheeks burning with shame. No one knew how much she longed to prove them wrong. Her father, the emperor, greeted her with a soft smile. "Lyra, my daughter," he said, "you are my gentle star." He patted her hand, but never spoke of war. She loved his smile, but she wanted more. She wanted his pride when she stood tall in armor, not just when she showed him her artwork. Lyra's favorite room was the rose garden atop the east tower. There, she tended red and white blooms with careful hands. She knew each petal's name and the way the morning dew made them shine. Her gentle touch calmed the roses and her mind. Yet every rose questioned her strength. "Princess, can you fend off a raider?" they seemed to ask. One afternoon, she tried a wooden sword. She gripped it tightly and raised it above her head. She swung with all her heart, yet the beam slipped from her fingers and clattered to the stones. She dropped to her knees, cheeks wet with tears she could not hide. No one had shown her how to hold the sword's weight or when to move her feet. She was alone in her weakness. Realizing her tears, Lyra pressed her palms to her eyes. She picked up the sword again and forced a smile. She wiped her face on her sleeve, then tucked the beam under her arm. She folded her lips shut so no one could hear her trembling breath. She would not show them more of her fear. At night, she studied old battle scrolls by candlelight. She traced the lines of warriors' faces and the shapes of their shields. In the flickering glow, she imagined herself among them, helmet glinting, blade raised. She learned tactics and formations on the pages. It was the only place she felt strong. Still, when morning came, she returned to the balcony. Soldiers lined up below, their spears straight and proud. Lyra watched them and whispered a quiet promise to herself. "One day, I will stand down there with them. Until then, I will learn, I will train, and I will wait for my chance to shine." Princess Lyra woke before dawn to the distant call of harbor bells. From her tower window, she saw the royal docks bathed in pale light. Great ships floated on the calm sea, their steel hulls smooth and new. Hoses hissed as men washed decks. Sailors moved like ants across the planks. Lyra pressed her hand to the cool glass, heart pounding with wonder. Below, the valorous navy stood in neat lines. Their dark blue armor gleamed in the sun, yet all eyes were fixed on the newcomers. At the pier's end, human vessels drifted in. They carried flags of white and gold, not green like Valeris. The crowd gasped as crews disembarked. Humans looked taller than valorous people. They wore simple uniforms and carried strange weapons. Their steps were sure and calm. Lyra slipped down the marble stairs and hurried to the courtyard. She joined a small group of servants and guards. No one stopped her. No one saw the princess among them. The air smelled of salt and fresh paint. Sailors laughed in rough voices as they unloaded crates. A few valorous guards frowned at the humans, but did not move forward. Lyra felt a mix of fear and excitement. At the end of the pier, a tall man stepped forward. He wore a silver breastplate over a dark tunic. His face was kind and strong. He held a small case of metal in one hand. A valorous herald announced, "Commander Marcus Hale of the United Earth Fleet." Marcus bowed once to the Emperor's flag, then scanned the crowd. His gaze fell on Lyra for a heartbeat. Lyra's breath caught. He looked away, and she let out a quiet sigh. An escort led Marcus and his officers toward the palace gates. Lyra followed at a safe distance. In the great hall, banners hung from the ceiling. Tapestry showed past emperors in victory. Marcus and his team stood before the throne. The emperor greeted them with open arms. Lyra watched from the shadows, her skirt brushing cool stone. Later, at the welcome banquet, long tables held piles of fruits, bread, and spiced meat. Nobles drank wine from tall goblets. Lyra slipped between pillars to find a place to watch. Trumpets sounded as Marcus entered. He carried himself with quiet pride. He nodded to the emperor and took his seat at the high table. A hushed laugh ran through the nobles when Lyra approached the edge of the hall. She carried a tray of sweet cakes for the honored guests. Her hands trembled, and a crumb dropped to the floor. Some nobles snickered, calling her clumsy. Lyra bowed her head, cheeks hot with shame. Marcus looked down and saw her kneel. He leaned over and said in a low voice, "Are you all right?" His words were soft, clear in the noisy hall. Lyra lifted her head and met his green eyes. She managed a small nod. No one else spoke. The room held its breath. Marcus stood, took her tray, and offered a warm smile. "Let me help you," he said. A servant rushed forward and offered Lyra a chair. For the first time, she felt someone see her as more than a weak princess. In that moment, something inside Lyra brightened like a star in the night sky. Night was deep and silent when Lyra's sleep broke with a thunderous roar. She raced to her balcony and saw the great gates smashed open. Raiders from the dark nebula surged into the courtyard. Their black armor gleamed under torchlight, and their long red blades glowed with menace. Valorous guards formed a shaky line, but fear showed on their faces. Many gripped their spears too tightly. Others wavered on the spot. Lyra felt her heart pound, but she would not turn away. Below, the raiders charged like a wave of shadows. They clashed with the guards in a crash of metal. Swords rang on shields, and cries of pain echoed against marble walls. A guard fell, clutching his arm, while another tried to raise his sword but dropped it in terror. Small fire bombs burst on the outer wall, sending sparks into the night sky. Smoke curled around the palace towers. Lyra held her breath as she watched the line of defense begin to crumble. Commander Marcus Hale moved through the chaos with quiet strength. He and his human soldiers formed a tight circle, blocking any raider who came near. Marcus parried a blade aimed at a young human beside him, then spun and struck down the attacker. Yet many valorous guards hung back, unsure if they should fight alongside these strangers. When a guard cried out and fell, Marcus broke formation. He rushed forward and knelt by the injured man, lifting him gently from the ground. Blood soaked the guard's tunic, and his face twisted in pain. Lyra knew she could not stand apart. She slipped down the side stair, grabbed a fallen torch, and ran to the battle's edge. The torchlight revealed a shattered shield near the prince's guard station. She snatched it up, careful not to slow her steps. Reaching Marcus and the wounded man, she knelt and pressed a clean strip of cloth from her dress onto the guard's cut. Her fingers worked with unexpected skill as she tied the cloth tight. Sparks flew across the stone as raiders fought close by, but Lyra remained steady. A raider lunged toward them, blade raised. Lyra held the shield forward, and the steel edge caught the blow. Marcus jumped between her and the attacker, pushing the raider back. He glanced at Lyra, surprise shining in his eyes. Even in the heart of battle, Lyra met his gaze without fear. With a shout, Marcus and his soldiers closed around the raider, driving him back through the shattered gate. The human soldiers and valorous guards rallied, pushing the dark nebula force into retreat. When the doors slammed shut, silence fell over the courtyard. Broken weapons and shields lay scattered in the dim light. Marcus turned to Lyra, helping her to her feet. "You were brave," he said softly. Lyra's knees trembled, but she stood tall. In Marcus's calm voice, she heard respect for the first time. As the smoke drifted skyward, Lyra felt a new strength grow inside her. Maybe she was not the weakest princess after all. At dawn, the palace was calm after the battle. Princess Lyra walked alone in the rose garden. The petals were wet with morning dew. Her hands still ached from holding the torch and shield. She thought of the night before and felt pride mixed with fear. Commander Marcus Hale entered the garden through a side gate. He carried his helmet under one arm and a warm smile. "Princess Lyra," he said softly, "you did well last night." Lyra looked up, surprised to see him so early. His eyes were kind. She felt her heart beat fast. Marcus moved closer and spoke quietly. "You have courage," he said. "You stood firm when others wavered." Lyra's cheeks grew warm. No one had ever praised her in such a way. She lowered her gaze and whispered, "I only did what I had to." He shook his head. "You have talent too," he said. "I want to help you learn more." Lyra blinked. "Teach me," she asked. Marcus nodded. "I can train you in sword and shield," he offered. "I can show you human tactics and how to lead." Lyra felt doubt rush in. She remembered how she dropped the wooden sword. Yet she also remembered how she held the shield for the guard. She met Marcus's green eyes and saw respect there. Her head lifted. "I will learn," she said. Soon, word of Marcus's offer spread through the palace. Courtiers gathered in whispering groups. Some nobles frowned and shook their heads. "A human teaching our princess," they muttered. "He has no right." Others looked at Lyra with new interest. They wondered if she could become strong after all. In the training yard, the next morning, Lyra stood in simple leggings and a leather vest. Marcus held a real sword in his hand. The sun shone bright on the stone floor. Lyra bowed her head and waited. At first, Marcus showed her how to stand. He placed her feet shoulder-width apart. He moved her arms into a guard position. Lyra felt awed. She was used to soft silk and painted scrolls. Marcus guided her grip on the sword and adjusted her hand. He spoke in clear, simple words. "Hold the sword here, not too tight," he said. "Bend your knees. Keep your eyes forward." Lyra listened and copied each move. She swung the sword gently. It felt heavy at first. Then she tried again and again. The court watched from a low balcony. Lyra heard their gasps when she landed her first strike on a training dummy. Her blade bit into the wood with a firm sound. She straightened and met Marcus's nod. A small smile came to her lips. As the sun rose higher, Lyra felt her muscles grow warm and strong. She raised the sword above her head and swung. This time, the blade cut straight through the dummy's chest. She lowered the sword and looked at Marcus. His smile was wide and proud. In that moment, Princess Lyra knew that her journey had truly begun. Each morning, Princess Lyra met Commander Marcus in the training yard. The air was cool, and the stones were smooth under her boots. Marcus stood with his sword and shield, ready to teach. Lyra took a deep breath and faced him without fear. First, Marcus showed her how to move. He stood close and guided her feet step by step. "Step forward with your left," he said, "then shift your weight. Bend your knees." Lyra tried again and again. At first, her feet felt clumsy. She stumbled and almost lost her balance. But Marcus stayed patient. He smiled and said, "Good. Try again." With each step she took, Lyra felt more sure. Next, Marcus taught her how to hold the shield. He placed her hand on the leather strap and adjusted the angle. "Lift your elbow," he said. "Let the shield cover you." Lyra raised the shield. It felt heavy, but she bent her arm and held it steady. She raised it too high at first, then too low. Marcus showed her the right height. "Good," he said. "Keep it like that." After she learned stance and shield work, Marcus moved on to sword strikes. He held 2 wooden swords and faced Lyra. He nodded. Lyra gripped her sword and raised it above her head. She swung down, aiming at the dummy's shoulder. Her blade missed by inches and hit the floor with a thud. She paused, cheeks hot. Marcus nodded again. "Aim here," he said, placing her hands on the hilt. "Follow through." Lyra took a deep breath and raised her sword once more. She swung slowly and watched the blade. It cut into the dummy's shoulder with a solid hit. She straightened and looked at Marcus. He gave a small clap. "Well done," he said. Lyra felt a thrill run through her. She lifted the shield and prepared for another strike. As days passed, Lyra's body grew stronger. Her arms burned less when she raised the sword. Her legs felt steady when she shifted weight. Marcus added new moves: a quick jab, a sideways block, a backward step to avoid attack. Lyra learned each one. She practiced them in order and then in simple sequences. Her mind and body worked together. One afternoon, Marcus set up a small obstacle course. He placed barrels and low beams on the ground. "Move through without dropping your sword," he said. Lyra looked at the course and felt her heart beat fast. She took the sword in one hand and the shield in the other. She stepped forward. She ducked under a beam, stepped over a barrel, and then spun around a corner in one smooth motion. At the end, she raised the sword in salute. Marcus smiled broadly. "You did it," he said. Lyra felt proud. She wiped sweat from her brow and smiled back. She remembered when she could not even lift the wooden sword. Now she moved like a true warrior in training. As the sun dipped low, Lyra gathered her courage and looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said. Marcus nodded. "Tomorrow we learn to lead," he replied. Lyra's heart swelled with hope. Her true journey was only beginning. At dawn, Princess Lyra and Commander Marcus stood before a small starship. Blue light shone on its hull. Marcus held a datapad with a mission plan. Lyra read the words again. Miners were trapped under a cave-in on Syrian moon. No valorous patrol could reach them. Marcus's human marines would go with her. Lyra felt her heart flutter, but she stood tall. She climbed the ramp and entered the ship. Inside, the air smelled of warm metal. Marcus checked his uniform. "You are ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded. She took a deep breath and said, "I am." The engines hummed, and the ship lifted off the ground. Valorous palace walls grew small in the viewport. The trip to Syrian moon took only an hour. Lyra watched gray rocks and jagged cliffs pass by. Some marines whispered about the moon's dangers: sudden quakes, sharp shards of stone, and collapsing tunnels. Lyra steadied herself. She remembered her training. She gripped her sword's hilt under her cloak and felt its weight give her calm. When the ship landed, Marcus led the way. Lyra and the Marines stepped onto rough ground. Dust rose under their boots. Red light from the sun's low angle cast long shadows. Marcus pointed to a narrow canyon ahead. "The miners are beyond that cave," he said. Lyra followed, shield at her side. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp. Water dripped from the ceiling. The floor was uneven. A low rumble shook the walls. Dust fell like rain. Lyra heard distant groans and cries. The miners were alive, but trapped behind fallen beams and rocks. A large boulder blocked their path. Marcus signaled the Marines to stand back. He knelt by the boulder and studied it. Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on the rock. She felt its rough surface. Then she looked at Marcus. "Let me try," she said quietly. Surprised, Marcus nodded. Lyra braced her feet and pushed with all her strength. The boulder shifted slowly, then rolled aside. Dust billowed, but Lyra held her ground. The miners stumbled out one by one. Their faces showed relief and awe. Lyra guided them toward the ship, helping those who limped. She spoke to them in calm tones. "Stay close. We will get you home." A young miner dropped to his knees and thanked her. Lyra smiled, brushing dust from her gown. Back on the starship, Marcus watched Lyra help each miner aboard. When the last man entered, he clasped Lyra's shoulder. "You led them well," he said. Lyra felt warmth in her chest. The ship returned to the palace. Word of Lyra's deed spread quickly. Courtiers and guards lined the landing pad. They bowed deeply as the miners stepped out, cheering Lyra's name. The weakest princess had shown real courage. As Lyra walked up the ramp, she raised her head high. In that moment, she knew the Empire would never see her as weak again. When Princess Lyra returned from Syrian Moon, the palace buzzed with talk of her courage. Servants whispered in corridors and guards bowed more deeply than before. Yet not all voices praised her. In the Grand Hall, nobles gathered in small circles, their faces tight with anger. Lady Maris, Lyra's older cousin, spoke first. She wore black velvet and a heavy gold necklace. A human teaches our princess. Maris hissed to Lord Varen. Our valorous ways mean nothing now. Lord Varen's lips pressed into a thin line. The Empire must show its own strength, he agreed. At the daily ceremony, the Emperor sat on his throne, his gaze firm. He praised Lyra's rescue mission. You have done valorous proud, he said. Lyra knelt and bowed her head. Many in the court applauded. But Lady Maris stood and lifted her voice until the hall fell silent. Your Majesty, Maris said, this human praise will make our soldiers doubt your rule. If the princess wants to learn war, she should train under valorous champions, not outsiders. Her words cut through the cheers like a blade. A murmur ran through the nobles. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others gripped their cups and glared at Lyra. The Emperor's face hardened. He raised his hand for quiet. Valorous honors all who serve it, he replied. If my daughter chooses to learn from our allies, that is her right. His voice echoed off the stone. Lady Maris bowed her head, but did not yield. Then let it be proven fairly, she said. If Princess Lyra can defeat our champion in single combat, we will accept her new role. If she fails, she must give up this training and return to court duties. A hush fell over the hall. Lyra's heart pounded. She looked at her father, whose stern face softened. Very well, he said. By valorous law, a challenge is fair. We will appoint our greatest warrior to duel the princess. Within the hour, the court announced Sir Kale as valorous champion. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek. He had won every duel in the palace arena. Kale stepped forward, sword in hand and shield at his side. His eyes met Lyra's with quiet confidence. Marcus stood at Lyra's side. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Trust yourself, he said. You have learned well. Lyra nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. That night, Lyra could not sleep. She walked the palace gardens under moonlight, the scent of roses heavy in the air. She touched her sword's hilt and recalled every lesson Marcus had taught her. She pictured the miners' grateful faces and the way her courage had shone. At dawn, the arena filled with soldiers, nobles, and servants. Torches lined the stone walls and banners flapped in the chill breeze. Lyra stood at one end, heart thundering, shield and sword ready. Sir Kale stood opposite, calm and silent. Lyra lifted her head and took a deep breath. The crowd fell silent as the trumpets sounded. In that moment, doubt and fear washed through her, but so did a new resolve. She would prove to valorous that strength came from more than birth or blood. With her sword held high, Lyra stepped forward to meet her greatest challenge yet. The arena fell silent as the trumpets faded. Princess Lyra and Sir Kale stood facing each other on the white stone floor. Torches flickered along the high walls, and banners of valorous waved in the chilly morning breeze. Soldiers and nobles watched from the stands, their breath visible in the cool air. Sir Kale lowered his sword in salute. Lyra lifted her shield and bowed her head. The signal came, a raised banner on the ramparts. Sir Kale advanced first, his heavy steps echoing. He swung his blade in a powerful arc. Lyra raised her shield just in time. The steel rang loud as the swords met. She staggered but held firm. Kale pressed forward, launching a quick thrust. Lyra stepped back, keeping her feet light. She remembered Marcus's lesson. Use speed, not strength alone. She tilted her shield to deflect the strike, and pivoted to Cal's side. He turned just in time to block her blade, surprise in his eyes. The crowd murmured. Lyra's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She feinted high, then struck low, aiming for Cal's knee. He blocked weakly, and Lyra followed with a swift jab toward his shoulder. Cal raised his sword to block, but Lyra twisted and caught his side with her shield. He stumbled, and Lyra pressed her advantage. Sweat beaded on Lyra's brow, but she focused on her breath. Cal recovered quickly and lunged again. Lyra danced back, then charged forward, sword first. She felt the weight and balance in her grip. Her blade tapped Cal's gauntlet, then slid inside his guard. He blocked the final blow with his forearm, creating a shower of sparks. Sir Cal stepped back and nodded once. "Well fought, Princess," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. Lyra lowered her sword in respect. Cal raised his own sword high, signaling her victory. The crowd erupted in cheers that shook the walls. Lyra felt relief and joy rush through her. She looked at Sir Cal and found only respect in his gaze. Marcus stood at the edge of the arena, clapping loudly. Lyra's heart swelled as she raised her sword to the cheering crowd. In the stands, Lady Maris sat beside Lord Varan, their faces a mix of surprise and respect. Even the harshest critics bowed their heads in honor. The Emperor rose from his throne and descended the steps. He embraced Lyra, his face shining with pride. "You have shown true valorous strength," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You are no longer the weakest princess. You are a warrior of this empire." Lyra smiled at him, then turned to Marcus. His eyes were bright with pride. She bowed and whispered, "Thank you." Marcus nodded, unable to hide his joy. As the crowd celebrated, Lyra felt a new chapter begin. She had faced doubt, danger, and challenge, and she had won. No longer would anyone call her weak. In that moment, Princess Lyra stood not just as a princess, but as a warrior queen in training. Weeks passed since Lyra's victory in the arena. Valorous soldiers trained with renewed purpose. Lyra stood among them each dawn, learning to lead lines of infantry. Marcus watched proudly as she gave clear orders and adjusted formations. Yet Lyra knew the true test lay ahead. One evening, scouts returned with urgent news. "Dark nebula forces gather at the northern border," the captain reported. They marched toward the capital. A hush fell over the war council. The Emperor rose, his face grave. "Prepare the city defenses," he commanded. Lyra stood beside Marcus at the maps table. Red markers showed enemy positions. Lines of hostile tanks and raiders advanced across the plains. Lyra traced their path with her finger. "We must hold the outer wall until our reinforcements arrive," she said. The generals nodded. Lyra's voice was calm, but her heart hammered. At dawn, Lyra rode at the front of a mixed legion of valorous troops and human marines. The sun's first light glinted on armor. Drums rolled as they approached the Great North Gate. Behind the walls, cannon towers bristled with weapons. Citizens watched anxiously from rooftops. The Dark Nebula army appeared like a dark storm. Tanks rumbled forward, followed by raiders in black armor. They fired red energy blasts that exploded against the stone wall. Lyra raised her sword high. "Hold the line," she shouted. Her words carried over the blast and smoke. Human marines and valorous soldiers formed two ranks. Lyra led the front, shield raised. She blocked a blast that cracked the wall nearby. Shards of stone flew around her, but she kept moving forward. Marcus rode alongside her, deflecting blasts with his own shield. The raiders breached the gate with a massive battering ram. Lyra charged inside with her troops. She swung her sword in wide arcs, cutting down enemies. Valorous spearmen followed her, their spears piercing raiders through broken armor. Human marines flanked to clear the path. Lyra's voice rang with orders. "Protect the archers. Fall back to the inner courtyard." They moved back in perfect formation. Archers on the walls fired volley after volley, thinning the enemy ranks. Lyra spotted a band of raiders aiming for the gate controls. She broke from the line and sprinted toward them. She slid under a raider's blade and struck his helmet with her shield, knocking him down. The others froze as Lyra pointed her sword at them. They dropped their weapons and fled. Marcus joined her, breathing hard. "Well done," he said. Lyra nodded and turned back to her troops. The remaining enemy forces pushed toward the inner walls. "Archers, fire at will," she commanded. Arrows rained down, and the raiders fell in droves. As the sun reached its peak, valorous reinforcements arrived, heavy tanks and additional legions. The enemy, seeing their losses and the fresh troops, began to retreat. Lyra watched from the wall as the dark Nebula army fell back. When the last raider fled, she lowered her sword and exhaled deeply. In the silent aftermath, Lyra stood among her soldiers. They cheered her name. Marcus dismounted and embraced her shoulder. "You led them well," he said. Lyra smiled, exhaustion and triumph in her eyes. The capital was safe once more. Lyra had proven herself not just in training and small battles, but in the heart of war itself. As the gates closed and the cheers echoed through the city, Lyra knew she was ready for the final step, her crowning as warrior queen. The morning sun bathed the palace in warm gold as crowds gathered in the Grand Plaza. Banners of Valorous and Earth fluttered side by side. Lyra stood before the steps of the great hall, clad in polished armor that caught every ray of light. Her sword and shield rested at her side. Today, she would be crowned warrior queen. Marcus stood behind her, uniform spotless and medals shining. He offered a steadying hand. Lyra nodded, drawing strength from his calm presence. She remembered her first day in the Rose Garden when she doubted herself. Now, she felt ready to lead the empire she loved. The Emperor stepped forward, cloak trailing behind him. He lifted the jeweled crown high for all to see. By the strength of Valorous and the courage of humanity, he proclaimed, "I name you Queen Lyra the Brave." He placed the crown gently on her head. Its weight was light, but its meaning was immense. A hush fell over the crowd. Then the plaza erupted in cheers and applause. Soldiers marched in perfect formation, drums beating a triumphant rhythm. Valorous guards knelt, and human marines saluted. Lyra lifted her sword and held it aloft. The sun glinted off the blade. "Long live Queen Lyra," they shouted. Lyra stepped onto the dais. Her eyes swept over the people she vowed to protect. Farmers and merchants, scholars and artisans, soldiers and diplomats, all stood together in celebration. Tears filled Lyra's eyes as she thought of the journey she had taken. From a shy princess in silk gowns to a warrior queen in steel armor. Marcus approached and knelt before her. He offered her the ceremonial standard, a flag woven with silver threads and symbols of peace and strength. Lyra accepted it and raised it high. The crowd cheered again, louder than before. Lyra smiled, her heart full of hope. She spoke in a clear voice that carried across the plaza. "People of Valorous and friends from Earth," she began, "we have faced darkness together. We have stood firm against fear and doubt. Now we move forward as one. Let our unity be our greatest weapon. Let our courage guide us in every challenge." Her words fell on eager ears. Marcus watched with pride as Lyra addressed the assembly. Even Lady Maris and Lord Veran, once her harshest critics, stood and nodded respectfully. Lyra paused, then lowered her gaze in a moment of reflection. "In honoring our allies, we honor our future," she continued. "Together, we will bring peace and prosperity to the stars." She raised the standard once more. Drums rolled, trumpets blared, and a wave of banners rippled through the plaza. As the ceremony ended, Lyra walked down the steps toward Marcus. He took her hand, and they turned to watch the feast laid out in the gardens. Long tables held dishes from Valorous and Earth, roasted meats, fresh fruits, spiced breads, and sweet pastries. Lanterns glowed overhead, though the sky was still bright. Lyra laughed as a young Valorous child offered her a bouquet of white roses. Marcus bowed and accepted a glass of earth wine. Lyra took a sip, sharp and full of flavor, then smiled at Marcus. "To new beginnings," she said softly. Marcus raised his glass. "To Queen Lyra," he replied. They clinked glasses, and Lyra felt the warmth of the empire in her heart. Around them, people celebrated under the rising sun. In that moment, Lyra knew her promise had come true. A human had made the weakest princess into a warrior queen. And together, they would lead Valorous into a bright, united future.